I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that there is a naming problem in cybersecurity and threat intelligence. There is just so many names, and I think Keith and Dave probably have some takes on this as well. But there's just a ton of activity clusters, and the reason there's so many names. People create names because they want to describe a chain of activity clearly, and it's really hard to describe that chain of activity by actually just re-describing it over and over and over. They need something easy to remember.
Thank you, as always, everyone, for being here. For those of you who have been here before, we've got a special returning guest in Alex. Alex, say hi.
Hello.
Welcome back, Alex. Good to have you here again.
Yeah, good to be here.
I'm loving the fall theme. I got locked out of my computer for a full 24 hours yesterday, and in the divorce with my user account, I've lost all my Zoom backgrounds, so not nearly as creative.
The question is, Keith, did you learn your lesson?
I learned a very valuable lesson. Yeah, I learned a lot about macOS security and which parts are ruthlessly effective.
Yeah, I'm super curious about what happened. I've only heard an ancillary report about that, but we don't have to.
If there's time at the end, we take all questions. Nothing's off limits here in Office Hours.
That's right.
All right. So today we got a couple things we're gonna hit. Two quick news items, and then really the star of the show today, so to speak, will be Alex. So she's gonna walk us through how we name and track threats. And so again, for those of you who followed along in Red Canary land for a long time, you've seen like Saffron Starling, Raspberry Robin. We, like most other large intelligence shops, have a naming convention, and we'll kind of break that down. But most importantly, I think as always, definitely we welcome questions. I think this will be a lot more fun if it's conversational. So if there's anything you want to know that we don't cover, please feel free to drop it in the chat at absolutely any time. We'll keep an eye out. All right, starting off, new OWASP Top 10. Dave, what do you got?
Yeah. So I think it was last Thursday, the new draft of the 2025 OWASP Top 10 dropped. It's open for comments now. It's going to be officially released, I think, on the 20th of November. Key things that are interesting here is that security misconfigurations and software supply chain failures are significantly up in the standings. Broken access control still at the top, underscoring our observation that identity threats are key attack vectors these days. People using identity. Identity is way easier to break, you might know, if the access controls are broken. But that seems to be where folks are going. I've been expecting security supply chain failures to pop up in the standings for a long time. You look at the news around drift. Like the big thing keeping a lot of us awake at night is being collateral damage from an attack against a vendor whose security posture we don't control. So I think we're going to hear a lot more about this going forward. Sneak peek into something that we're working on with our CISO Advisory Council is we're starting to draft a SaaS Bill of Rights. Like, what is it we as consumers of SaaS believe should be in every single SaaS application so we can defend ourselves against stuff like this? So if you're interested in being part of that conversation, reach out to me through Office Hours. I'd love to hear your voices as well. But I think that these are going to become louder and louder conversations as we see more supply chain failures. So if you want to get involved with the community, give some comments on that top 10 draft, do so. You got a few more weeks to do that. Another week, I guess.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, the software supply chain thing, we've obviously talked about that in a bunch of different contexts here. So that one, I think, is, of all of those, looks like a very predictable call out for sure. So I know that's been coming home to roost, like not just for app devs, but even for folks on the enterprise security side, right? Just
absolutely
the concern of software supply chain being used to just compromise individuals too. So
yep,
very cool, love it. All right. Next up, so we got Gootloader, which is back following a past takedown. So there's a new campaign that's been identified, after around a half-year-ish absence. And I think maybe, hadn't really thought about this when we were prepping, but I think there's maybe a good tie-in here to the theme of the day, right? Which is just like how sometimes imperfect, but also challenging attribution can be. And so, I think it's, probably, very rare that nothing happened in 7 months. Obviously, things have been happening. This kind of resurgence has been happening for long enough for someone to notice it and then report on it. But yeah, maybe just a neat little case study and being able to tie these behaviors to names that we all understand. And so I'd say, like the next two call outs there are interesting, that I don't think those are none of those are novel. I think, maybe the lore in this case is fairly specific. So I don't know, like Alex, I don't know if you've got a take on this or anything that you all have seen on the Red Canary side, but I know we've talked very extensively about this, and I know your team's written a lot about it in the past.
Yeah, of course. Gootloader is definitely something we try to keep an eye on. It is tied to ransomware, which is, should be a concern for everybody, and it could be the first indications that you have that ransomware might be coming down the line. So it's something that we keep eye on. This one has definitely the Huntress article goes a lot into all of the different obfuscation it has. And what if these are new variants, what these are looking like now after that, potential break in operations. So that's always going to be something we're going to look at and make sure our coverage is still good and we're able to still catch this activity.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that context. And I'd say, thank you, Laura, for dropping that over there. And there's the link to the original Huntress research. So not a lot more to say about that today, because I do want to make time for our somewhat related topic. But yeah, please check that out. And I'm sure this will definitely not be the last time we talk or write about Gootloader. So that's something for everyone to look forward to as we enter our annual threat detection report season. Very exciting. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex, and just kind of talk through how we name and track threats. Dave and I will be here manning the chat. And please, if anyone has any questions, now, or if you want something you want to make sure we get to in the Q&A, there's no better resource for talking us through this and helping to kind of fill in some gaps here than Alex. So, all right, with that, I'll let you kind of take it away.
All right, sure. Yeah, we're just going to talk about how Red Canary names and tracks threats. But before we do that, really kind of unpacking the naming challenge and talking about, how did we get to where we're at and our philosophy. And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that there is a naming problem in cybersecurity and threat intelligence. There is just so many names. And I think Keith and Dave probably have some takes on this as well. But there's just a ton of activity clusters. And the reason there's so many names, people create names because they want to describe a chain of activity clearly. And it's really hard to describe that chain of activity by actually just re-describing it over and over and over. They need something easy to remember. But everyone is looking at it from a little bit different lens. On the first picture, the spreadsheet, Florian Roth has the spreadsheet that began in 2015, and it is probably an essential tool for most Intel analysts. And it's hugely helpful for just mapping all of the aliases. But like any mapping system, it's going to be slightly imperfect. And that's largely because everybody's seeing slightly different things, which is why the whole reason why we have these different names. And before we go into why we have all these different names, the other reason that we have names is because these impact communication and collaboration. Names are really that way to communicate findings to our stakeholders. So going back to that easy to describe chain of activity. But having all of these different names, it does add that cognitive load to our stakeholders who then have to find the aliases or translations.
Alex, can I ask you a quick question before we kind of hit the bottom part of this chart? Can you explain, just 30 seconds or less, what's an activity cluster? What kind of meets the bar there? This is actually I have no idea, despite using this term all the time. Is it two things together? Is it four? Like, is there a hard and fast rule just for folks who might not be familiar with that?
Yeah, I would say that there is no hard and fast rule. And I think that goes for not only activity clusters, but also group names. I think that for, if you take state-sponsored activity, for example, some group names aren't going to be created until you can tie that activity all the way to like a government sponsoring agency, where other names are just, a grouping of common TTPs or infrastructure that we assess all belongs to some group, whether or not it can be tied to a specific country or group of individuals. And so activity cluster really varies. And I think that's a big reason why there's so many different names, is because it's really hard to know what kind of criteria other vendors are using when they create their activity clusters, and how rigorous is their criteria compared to like our criteria. We'll get into a little bit more of what we're looking at for activity clusters. But we start with, similar to other vendors where we have a temporary designation, we have that as well. And that can be as small as some activity that we're seeing on a couple of different endpoints, even if those endpoints are within the same customer organization. I think the other place that can cause a lot of confusion and is a little bit nuanced is with ransomware actors. So I mentioned state-sponsored and how far in the attribution lane do you go there? But if you have a ransomware group, these are often self-named, but like maybe Black Basta or Ransom Hub, and I say that, does that mean to you that I'm talking about just that encryptor, that ransomware malware? Or are you thinking the entire affiliate chain that does all of the pre-activity before that, the initial access, lateral movement, things like that, or all of the above? And if you think it's all of the above, then what happens if a different affiliate uses very different TTPs but delivers the same ransomware? And so the naming problem is just, it's difficult across the board.
Yeah, and I think, just kind of looking through, by the way, I love the graphic you have in here, because I think this is like, maybe the most perfect explanation for like why and how even something that sounds the same, or that the general public or, InfoSec at large thinks is the same thing, might be wildly different. And it is like just such a unique product of like what we can see and what we prioritize too, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really the core issue, is that we all see a slightly different piece of the puzzle. And it's really hard to make those connections to know that we're looking at the same group, or to continue to track that group. One, because we don't know the criteria that other vendors are using, but also they might see things that are different. And so if you're looking at Red Canary endpoint data versus Zscaler, who's seeing a little bit more on the network, you might have two different teams where you have the folks that are looking at the endpoint. Maybe we're seeing malware drop, and we see all of the activity that the group does, the processes surrounding that malware. Whereas someone on the network side might be watching network connections or infrastructure, and maybe we can connect that activity, and we all think it's group A. But then what if group A starts using a different malware? Well, now on the endpoint side, maybe we think it's a totally different group. And so we come up with group B. Whereas the folks that are following the infrastructure are like, nope, same group. Still, they just changed their TTPs. Or alternatively, a lot of groups will share infrastructure. So maybe they share infrastructure with another group. And so we start tracking multiple different groups, but the infrastructure vendor doesn't, and they all see it as one group. So it can be really hard to, even if we start with the same knowledge, that to not have that veer into different groups, or make sure that we're continuing to have the same definition of that group over time as we see different things.
Yeah, and I really love the call out to IR firms here too. I mean, I think even, as long as I don't know, thinking back to when we did our first threat detection report, and like every year since, I think when we launched that, we have a very unique, like, I wouldn't say unique. We do have, well, I say we have a fairly unique and like really comprehensive view of very early stage activity, right? Like that is, I'd say like most of our energy is directed at like initial access and the couple steps just beyond, right? And it's not to say that we don't look for later stage activity, but obviously like we want to find things early and fast when they're easy and inexpensive to clean up, right? And so, and that's compared like very much in contrast with, you know, if you're reading like Mandy and M Trends or like an IR firm's report, those are like very, very different views, right? To your point, like they may have like a really, really deep view into really late stage activity. They may not have a perfect understanding of how that thing arrived. It's all just kind of subject to, you know, like the evidence that's available. Um, and so I'd say like partially for, you know, this conversation's, I think, more about like naming and attribution, but I think just like as a consumer of this stuff, like I think just the IR firm call out's important because I always encourage folks to like read our report, read CrowdStrike's report, read Mandiant's report. Like we all like Zscaler, like everyone kind of has a like very unique, a more unique view of that like activity than I think seems apparent, right? And so they're really complementary, and obviously like untangling that can be a little bit difficult, but it's yeah, it's a just good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. And I, I think when I look at what we're tracking as groups, it's more along those lines of those activity clusters. We're seeing something that's a pretty small part of the intrusion chain, whereas Mandiant, going all the way back to APT1 report, they have this huge corpus of knowledge of multiple intrusions from initial access all the way through to the end goals for that espionage or fin actor group. That oftentimes we're just not getting that same kind of visibility.
Yeah, and it does, like, I mean, I think you mentioned the previous slide, just comes down to focus and priorities, right? That's like, I think, Mandiant maybe being, the best example of a private full scope intelligence first organization, like really early on. And that was like, dedicating resources to that is really valuable, but also really expensive. And for us, that would take away from, our operational priority, which is like find it fast and then worry about what to call it, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. So to name or not to name, this slide is more about maybe you're working already in an intelligence group and you don't have your own name. Like, should you name it? Should you add to the noise or not? And I think when we considered this and thought about should we have our own naming scheme within Red Canary, these are the type of questions that we would try to answer is what visibility do you have? Are we seeing something that's unique that doesn't have a name or doesn't have an easy way to talk about it? Kind of what you were just talking to, Keith, like how much time can you dedicate to analysis? So even if you're not seeing something unique, maybe you're using a lot of open source resources, but how much time can you dedicate to that analysis of making those connections to identify and continue to make sure that you're tracking these named groups? And do you have that ability kind of correlated? Do you have that ability to track changes over time? And then what and how do you need to communicate to your stakeholders? And I think this is a key question for any Intel shop, but our stakeholders and how they want to be communicated with, what they care about, is really important. And so kind of going back to that ransomware example, maybe our stakeholders don't really care about us having a different name for every affiliate. They just want to know that the end goal is ransomware, and maybe even having a different name. If you have like a number scheme or something like that, it might take the focus off where now they have to go down again, that cognitive load of like, what does this affiliate do? What ransomware is it associated with? It's not intuitive in the name versus when I just hear like Black Box or ransomware group. And putting that cognitive load on them can be hard. So how do you communicate clearly and concisely to stakeholders?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm super curious whether anybody here too, sorry, Dave, like is using or consuming that type of stuff. Because I think, my observation as an outsider, like the intelligence profession anyway, is like, I think lots of people are very, very interested in the threat intelligence. The names obviously make it easy as a consumer to just like, to recall these things and to kind of correlate them, particularly across vendors. But I think, I kind of suspect there's a relatively small percentage of organizations that can really like internalize and mechanize that intel. So to your point about like stakeholder communications, like there could definitely be diminishing returns there too. I think, like at the high end, I know there's some public lament for the lack of detail that vendors sometimes disclose, but at the same time, like, every additional piece of detail I know that we disclose has like a high cost. There's a maintenance associated with that. You want to keep that current. So.
Yeah, so I have some questions around this. Like I see the value in naming clusters of activity, especially for boots on the ground, because it's a very quick way of saying this is the set of behaviors that we observe, right? When I say a particular name, people that are in the business of defending know like what things to go look for. It's a really quick way of activating folks at that level. But the other thing that I see with naming these actors is attribution, and I'm curious like what your experience has been, if you've got anything to share about at what point it makes sense in a response to actually bring in the topic of attribution and what companies can really do based on that attribution. Or is this naming really a tool that is primarily most effective for researchers and responders for coordinating on how we identify and defend and anticipate what's coming next?
Well, for Red Canary, it's really the latter. We're not focusing too much on attribution and or trying to find like a country behind the actor. We're not shying away from it either if that's attribution has been made elsewhere, but we're really focused on like the how and the what next. And or really like that Cotton Eye Joe method. Where did it come from? Where did it go? And so we're using activity clusters to help describe that activity of or named clusters of here's what happened, here's what's going to happen next, and here's what you need to do about it. More generally, attribution, it can imply a couple different things, attribution to like actual people or attribution to a country. I think that has its place. It certainly has its place in the government, in law enforcement, in partnerships with those groups. And I don't have any strong feelings against attribution at all. It's not something that I shy away from for other groups.
Yeah, I think that's actually it's funny, like Robert just chimed in, but I think it is and again, it's all what you prioritize, right? Like if you're a national intelligence agency, like your mandate is very much pinned to like foreign adversaries, national intelligence priorities. And so like there's a tremendous amount of like time and energy directed at attribution at that level. To Alex's point, I think in agreement with Robert, like, we are a blocking and tackling shop first and foremost. And then if we know what to call it and can use that to help us like anticipate, understand coverage and predict, or help our customers do the same, that's really valuable. But I think it's it's in one case it's a nice to have, and in the other case it's like, kind of like the leading job. And I think that's just like it's an interesting distinction, particularly when you just kind of look at what the primary mission of the organization is, and then like there's usually secondary benefits. And I think for us, like, whether we can name it and point to it tends to be a little bit secondary.
Yeah, I think the other place where it can be interesting is with with insurance. Some insurance, cyber insurance, has a war clause where nation state can fit into that. So that is definitely a place where attribution could really matter for private companies. All right. Yeah, we're getting on time quickly, so let's talk about our clustering methodology.
Let's do it.
All right, so we're tracking known activity using a common name. So kind of like my pun there, it doesn't have to be owl or nothing. We're not changing every name to a Red Canary name. If it has a common name, we're largely using that. If we find something new, it could be just on a couple of endpoints, something we haven't seen, we'll start tracking that as an egg. This is an activity cluster. It's like Microsoft Storms groups or Mandiant's UNC groups. It's just that temporary designation as we do more research. And as we do more research, if we start to see it in more environments, we start to see value in communicating this, we'll graduate that cluster to a bird name, which is always a color and a bird, just like Red Canary. That's what our threat groups are as well. But really for us, like we embrace a lot of flexibility. Our process is still evolving. I don't think that we're doing it perfectly for all the reasons that I talked about, that it can be really hard to adopt other groups' names, but it can also add a lot of noise if you're just continually like making new names when you don't have maybe something new to say about it. And so iteration and learning are really essential to our process. And so now we dig in a little bit more. So this is just a nice little graphic. So the top two in green, those are our intel sources. So a lot of what we're getting is that proprietary intel. So this is coming from detections in our customer environments. That's the biggest source of intel for my team. If we see unknown activity, that goes into, we start to investigate that. We might reach out to our partners, we'll look at open source, we'll do malware analysis. And then if we identify, hey, this is Gootloader, then it's named by that other vendor, we adopt that primary name or group in the case, malware or group. If it's new or unnamed activity, it goes into that temporary designation of egg. And then we start to do additional research. Once we do additional research, monitor it for a while, we will hatch our eggs, and that's when a new color bird is named. One thing that I wanted to point out here too is like the primary name can be really hard to identify for another vendor. Just like that spreadsheet shows, there's a lot of different names, and oftentimes it can come down to what is people's personal preference? Do you like the APT number naming scheme, or do you like the bears from CrowdStrike, or the storm names from Microsoft, and everyone has kind of their favorite intel sources. And so that primary name can be really difficult to standardize even just for that. Or do you go with like the first one that identified it? Sometimes the first people that identify something, that's not the name that sticks. It's a different name that sticks. So it can be really, really tough to find that primary name.
Yeah, and I think for, it definitely feels like a case where simpler is better, probably for most folks, right? Unless you are like another kind of like peer intelligence organization, like that can be, there's like, I feel like the phrase diminishing returns keeps coming up. Like you could spend a ton of time and energy, particularly on the consumer side of this, trying to figure out, whether it's, whether you want to name this thing yourself, use somebody else's name. And I think that, honestly, that's like where like Florian spreadsheet has been super helpful for folks, is just like, I think for the majority, just being able to correlate this stuff and say, hey, like Red Canary calls it X, Microsoft calls it Y, Mandiant calls it Z. And like for, that's the intersection of those for most folks is probably plenty good enough. But.
Yeah,
So
for sure. And go ahead, Dave.
Do we know, or do you know of any mappings that actually sort of merge together the MITRE ATT&CK framework with these actors, and saying, hey, these TTPs are used by these actors, just sort of as a way of pivoting? Like, it'd be interesting to know, like, given this particular tactic, these people use it, and then to read on from there about what their objectives might be. Are we aware of anything like that?
Yeah, in MITRE's website does that. They will show which groups use each techniques. Another company that I think is doing a really great job of that is Tidal Cyber. They're doing a lot of mappings along MITRE ATT&CK. And so I think they do a really great job of that as well. But yeah, you can do like the attack navigator is a good place where you can input a couple of different actors, and then you can see where the shared techniques are too that they use. So going from that actor to technique perspective versus kind of what you were mentioning, the technique to actor perspective.
Cool.
Yeah, I think yeah, I am definitely like familiar with title. That was going to be an example. Like I would have come up, I know like Push Security, I think has done like a little bit of like done some stuff there too. And that's the wrong name. Shoot. But I'll see if I can find it and drop it in the chat. But yeah, that is interesting. I know like we've, you know, one of the most useful applications is being able to kind of abstract that stuff into something like attack and then be able to follow something through, mainly because like, yeah, you kind of have to string like our view of the world together with maybe a Mandiant's view of the world, which is later
Right.
stage. And now you have a pretty complete understanding. We won't spend a bunch of time. Well, really won't. Like, I think we're at time, and I think if you've been here before, subscribed to our blog, have read our threat detection report, you've seen these, and I think I'll just kind of call out that for the first time this year, this past year, when we released our TDR, our threat detection report, like Alex and team put together. What is affectionately referred to as our field guide to color birds. So you can read about all those there, and I think our goal is to continually just feed that with more and more of these public profiles. So very, very, it's like super helpful resource. And obviously we're always open to feedback. So I apologize. We don't have time for questions today, but thank you so much, Alex. This was awesome. I hope this is helpful to everyone else. Like always appreciate you being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. All right. Dave, Alex, everyone signing off. Thanks again. And we will see you all next week. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.